I was raised on a strong and steady diet of a corporation known as the Walt Disney Company. And the more I grow older, the more I start to understand that watching Disney movies set my standards for love astronomically high. Like, really, really high. I mean, you look at the fairy tales that they put out, key ending, happily ever after. Not that there are no happily ever afters in life, because there are quite frankly a fair amount of them, but you know, when you watch so many movies with so many of those endings and so many of those quite frankly strong stories that center on relationships, that center on finding someone else and finding a partner at that, and then you try to put that together into modern day life, you'll find that it's really not that easy to do. It's not that easy to find someone. It's not that easy to even make a relationship stand on those levels. But when you grow up watching so many of those movies, it's something that is just instilled in you, that that's what love is and that's what love will be for me. I grew up watching Robin Hood countless times at my grandma's house when I was going to bed. Do you know how high the standards are already when we're talking about the bar for relationships? I mean, it's off the screen. Robin Hood, Maid Marian. That's just the first movie that I've mentioned, you know, the story from them. By the way, before I get into any of this, massive heavy spoiler warning. So if you haven't watched any of these movies, you should plan on maybe trying to go watch them, maybe on Disney Plus, maybe somewhere else, and then be sure to come back here to look at the rest of this overall talk. But you look at Robin Hood and Maid Marian, and their story is, you know, their childhood sweethearts, essentially, but they drifted apart as they grew older, and they both love the other, but they don't know if the other person actually loves them back, because they've drifted apart for so much. They don't know if that person has changed. They don't know if that person is different than how they were when they were growing up. Don't worry, they get back together, and immediately one of the first things he does is he asks for her hand in marriage. I mean, Robin Hood's Maid Marian, obviously. And watching that movie, especially with how both of their characters are presented, you could imagine how being able to watch that movie countless times has shaped my view of relationships, shaped my views of having a partner. Safe to say, I, as of now, do not have a childhood sweetheart, so I guess that's not necessarily a part of my story, but in that story that they presented in Robin Hood, that was a key part of it. And then, you know, at the end, happily ever after, they get married, they go off in the carriage. Assumingly, at least per the movie, it says they have 6 kids, which, wow, a lot. And you know, how besides the characters is love portrayed? I mean, some of the lines, and you know, I'm just starting with one movie, there's a lot more that I want to count on. There are so many good lines. And from a movie perspective that has love as a theme, they're able to script those lines, which makes it a little more different and more ideal compared to a modern day in a real life setting where you don't know entirely how the other person is going to react, because you got to make the actual progress. You can't just throw it out there. I mean, Robin Hood is about to die, and eventually Maid Marian's like, oh, don't kill him, I love him. And he literally pulls, Marian, my darling, I love you more than life itself. Yeah. That's the standard that I grew up listening to. And again, happily ever after they run off, they also have a nice moonlight stroll. Love by Nancy Adams plays in the background. By the way, to my future wife, who will probably be watching this video one way or another, Love by Nancy Adams is our wedding song. Non-negotiable. Don't even try to say otherwise. That's what we're going to do. And that was the movie that I watched countless times again, and watching a love story like that so many times really shapes your perspective on love. And there's so many other lines and so many other movies. I mean, I look at Fox and the Hound, and while the love in that movie is more focused on general friendship and a general bond in that sense, you know, Todd, the fox in that movie, again, if you haven't watched Fox and the Hound or Robin Hood, you probably should go watch them. He ends up being introduced to a female fox named Vixie, and he is so enthralled, again, big word, had to call you back there, by her beauty, by her looks. And although he doesn't really know it at that point, but by her potential personality, and he's talking in his head about how she's so beautiful, and you know, he's trying to talk himself through how he's going to approach her, and you know, all he says is hi. She says hey back, and you know, Todd kind of had some help there because Vixie already knew who he was going into that. And the line that I think really stands out is hilarious to me. He says, can I call you by your first name? He doesn't even know her name, but he asks for permission to call Vixie, call this girl by her first name. Maybe you haven't asked that question directly if you're a guy to a girl. But let's be honest, there probably has been a girl in your life that you've debated probably asking that question to, that you might have almost asked that question to because of how much you love the idea of them. And yes, there's a difference between loving someone and loving the idea of someone. Disney, I feel like a lot of the times makes that bridge fairly easy, and especially a bunch of movies, they make that bridge so obvious and they make it so simple. Not that way again in real life. But those are a few examples. And I haven't even gotten into the princess movies, mind you. I mean, off the top of my head, and because I've been to Disney World so many times, Cinderella comes to mind. In my opinion, I think the live-action remake that they did about a decade ago is better than the animation. If you want to fight me and think otherwise, go ahead. But if you look at that remake, Ella, because, by the way, in that movie, Cinderella, well, she does go by Cinderella, is actually first Ella. That's her birth name. Eventually takes on Cinderella as the movie goes on. And the prince, who does have a name in this one, not in the animation, his name is Kit. The way that, although they don't have this ample amount of time at first on screen together before obviously the ball, you know the Cinderella story, you know how that's going to go. But the way that they craft that entire relationship is, again, gorgeous. It's where he's trying to actually conceal himself, and then, especially in that story, he realizes that this girl actually doesn't know that he's the prince. And, you know, they get talking a little bit while he's hunting, and she's just on her own horse ride, getting away from the stepmother and, you know, her daughters at that. But they work that first conversation in really well, where she's very centered, very balanced. She's basically giving him her opinions, but also advices that she's learned from her mom and from her dad over the years. And, you know, he sees that and he's like, okay. Simple, it's okay. You know, she's like, can you not kill this deer because there's a stag that kind of got crossed up between the two. And although he's like, you know, we're hunting, like, you know, hunting, the whole thing is to, you know, do that to animals. But he obliges, he understands, he ends up going back to the palace. Can't stop thinking about her. By the way, that's how a lot of people can be in relationships when they first meet someone. If it's someone they want at that level, and especially in real life, again, different from movies, but I think this is an action that transcends both the screen and reality. General infatuation with someone that whoever it is, at least for the other person, they cannot go out of their minds. They cannot drop this person that they crossed paths with in their mind. And he straight up is like that. The prince, Kit. His name is Kit. I actually remember that. I honestly, off the top of my head, I forget the actor's name off the top of my head. Obviously, it's Lily James who plays Ella in Cinderella live action remake. If you want to say, Kyle, why didn't you do your research? You can say that, quite frankly. But the main actor was, at least for the prince, was in Game of Thrones. I hope that can help. But this girl he can't get this girl off his mind. He's talking about her. He mentions it to her dad, his dad rather, her dad. It's Cinderella. You know how that goes. He says he talks about it to his father, the king, and one of the other soldiers who's very high ranking. And then eventually we get to the night of the ball itself. Yes, I know how the Cinderella story goes. I hope you do too. I'm not going to tell you the story word for word. Basically what happens in this movie, in the remake, she arrives, again, fashionably late. And I'm talking fashionably late where she has her own entrance. Like, she knocks on the door right as the ball's about to begin. Door swings open. Shout out the doorman, by the way. The doorman in that movie, he needs some love, because if he didn't react to the knocks on the door in time, everything might not have come together. Now, she strolls up down the steps. By the way, the Cinderella dress in that movie is peak. This movie, honestly, is peak. I think that more people need to understand just how good this movie is, and I think it's the best Disney live-action remake at that. Eventually, they meet, they have the first dance, and whether it's a mix of their chemistry, a mix of the cinematography, a mix of the music, it's so good. It's so good. That sequence is one of the few sequences, and again, I'm a grown man, that I can get giddy to and kick my feet to just because of how gorgeous it is. That's what that sequence does to me. There are a few sequences that I have that guttural reaction to, and I think especially in a modern age like this, especially with how men are kind of raised, though nowadays it's shifting that entire personality of what a man should be and what he shouldn't be. If you're a man and you find a movie like that where it's something romantical, and it fills your heart with love and joy and any good feeling under the sun, hold on to it, because you might need that movie more than you expect to in this life. And there's so many other examples besides, just those two I mentioned. I just mentioned them off the top of my head. Movies in general set the standard for love. And yes, I talked about Disney because primarily that's the one that I grew up with. I mean, look at DreamWorks. DreamWorks has tons of good examples. How to Train Your Dragon trilogy, Hiccup and Astrid, absolutely phenomenal writing, phenomenal couple that they built up throughout each movie, not just in one and then they forget about it for the next couple. I'm looking at you, Balto, because that's exactly what you did. But that's a good example. More recently, I mean, you look at, on the Disney side, Zootopia. yes, Zootopia is more of an emotional sense. The second one just came out. I did see it. Really good. Go see it. On top of the original, that's also a great relationship. While they haven't gotten to the exact point where I actually thought they were gonna, get to in the second one, spoilers again, where it's PDA's actual kissing. Didn't get to that. That's what the third one's for. I'm probably gonna do that then. But Zootopia is another good example where it's just on an emotional level how important love can be in a partnership, how important someone can mean to someone else. That's another great look. More recently, again, if we're talking Disney, it's Pixar technically, and I feel like this is, again, amazing example, one of the best in recent memory. Elemental. If you haven't watched Elemental, again, maybe because it came out where it was like kind of shortly after the pandemic, not exactly where everyone's going to the theaters, I would check it out. It's a rom-com, I believe. I think it's a rom-com. It should be a rom-com. It is a rom-com, I hope. But Wade and Ember's relationship, the build-up, the writing. Yes. 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 Also with Wade, I got a strong connection with him compared to some of the others, which I feel like for some, and they could feel this specifically for this movie, Wade's character, who I think he's just like the general white guy, which is funny because his voice actor is not. He is this very emotional man. He's in touch with his emotions. He's a very emotional man. And he's able to help Ember deal with her own emotions and her own problems. And there are some lines in Elemental, I kid you not, from Wade to Ember, that I straight up, I blush. I'll be honest, yeah. There are lines that I blush at. One specifically that stands out to mind is when they're on the beach and they're just talking after a very awkward scenario, because Elemental, for those who haven't watched it, is a movie that, again, is a rom-com, but it's also focused on immigration and basically Ember's dad. Ember's fire, by the way, Wade's water. I should have mentioned that off the get-go. Ember's dad hates water people. And it's very poetic that in the movie, Ember's rock, I guess if you want to call it, I guess rock, Minecraft, lava, water, obsidian, is in fact a water guy. Like Wade literally gets banned from their store. Like that's a key and crucial detail in the build up to the plot for that. But there's a scene where they're talking after that where he's banned from the shop, and she is very vulnerable, and she's breaking down how her entire life she's been in that position where she believes she will be taking over family inheritance for the shop after her dad retires. And she's questioning if she's failing, if she's a bad daughter, and a very good character design, I might add, is that her flame actually dims. Like, she's a flame, obviously, she's fire, and when she's talking about all this to Wade, her brightness dims, her flame actually diminishes. Not entirely. There's some entirely diminishing to a degree in that movie. But she's just like, I'm a mess. And Wade's response, nah, I think you're even more beautiful. That's it. That's the level right there. And again, another standard for love that for me has really been impactful. It's really been, okay, this is what I should aspire to do. This is what I should aspire towards. And I mentioned DreamWorks, Bad Guys, Wolf and Diane, quite possibly might be my favorite couple in media. And that's saying something, because I've watched a bunch of movies. And they built that up over 2 movies. In the first one, and just to make clear how impactful these two have been, quite possibly on my standards for relationships, my most played song in my Spotify Wrapped this year, Wrapped that just came out, was a song that was in the background of an edit of them dancing together at the gala in the first movie. That's how much and how big of an impact that couple has on me, quite frankly. I mean, you know, I was listening, and mostly it was just in the background because the song itself is really good, but I was introduced to it through that edit. And then, you know, most recently in the second movie, they're navigating what could be a potential relationship, because, you know, they like each other, but they're not able to really make it official, partially because of societal norms and standards set from each of their positions. I think that's a very minor part that the movie teaches about, yet it isn't the main part of the plot in general. But, you know, she saves him in outer space. He, like, literally air swims because, again, they're in outer space, zero gravity. He, like, moves over to her and embraces her. And she's at first is like, oh, okay, this is actually a little strong. I didn't expect that from him. I don't mind it, though. And he pulls back and is like, look, sorry, we did all we could. And as he's trying to apologize, because on top of that relationship, basically he's an ex-con and she's the governor. She's a high-ranking government official. And they're indirectly, the bad guys, I should say, are indirectly responsible for her losing her job. And so he's like, look, I'm sorry. Like, he's basically like, look, sorry for ruining your life. He's not even able to finish that sentence because she just kisses him. I kid you not. Even though I knew that that scene was coming, I had seen it get leaked a few days before I had gone in to see the movie myself, I said dub in the theaters when they kissed. Does that make me weird? I think it might make me weird, but I don't think it does. Again, another standard for love. There's so many other movies I could talk about. I think one that deserves its own video could be Lady and the Tramp, because again, the spaghetti sequence, top tier. One of the most romantic sequences that I had watched, especially when I was young growing up. Bella Notte is still an amazing song. It will forever be an amazing song. The aftermath of their relationship, at least the next day, that's not necessarily aspirational. It really is not aspirational in any means. Yes, it's Disney, happily ever after. They have a litter, you know, they continue to see each other in the end. But there are some parts of that movie that I think can deserve its own video when it comes to breaking down their relationship. Because yes, at some points, it's very romantic. At some points, it's very much, you know, I want this for myself. Other points, I don't think I want that. But there's so much with that. There's so much with so many other movies. You could give me countless examples. I could give you countless examples of movies that have raised and set my standards for love. That's really something that I think we all can agree with. It's not just individually. I'm saying this honestly as just a man in general. I was talking to my mom and I was floating around this idea. And I mentioned Cinderella earlier. And my mom told me, for women, that sentiment is so strong. Where's my Prince Charming? I promise you, he's not at the dive bar you frequent. I'm not saying you won't meet your Prince Charming at a dive bar randomly, but are you looking in the right place? But in general, movies as a whole allow us to feel love so strongly. And again, going back to Disney movies, yes, I feel like my standards for love are partially ruined because I grew up on all of them. But maybe the process of that being ruined is actually a good thing. Maybe while I know that everything there isn't exactly attainable in the present day, maybe those are just examples for us as people to look for. And I'm not saying we're all going to have a happily ever after when it comes to a relationship sense. But what if maybe those movies, while they set the standard in our heads and minds and maybe to an unheard of level, what if they generally offer something that we want other people to treat us? How do these movies give us these opportunities, and whether it be scenarios or general instances to find in our life, to look for when we're searching a partner? And yes, you probably shouldn't go too high when it comes to that, because there's always too much when you look at what makes up a person, and you're not going to find perfection. Perfection doesn't exist. I guess if there is a takeaway from this, perfection doesn't exist. But maybe all these movies that we watch and all this media we consume, while it can in some ways be very positive, like I've talked about, very negative, I think I could talk about that on another time. What if all of that is just about helping us learn to love, both how to receive, both how to give, and in general what love is all about? Maybe that's what Disney was trying to tell me growing up, and today, because I still watch Disney movies today. I gotta find a girl with blue eyes, tell her that your eyes are like sapphires. By the way, O'Malley, he kind of knew what he was doing with that, especially when he ran it back underneath the stars in Aristocats to Duchess. Even he was like, yeah, it's kind of corny. But even if it is corny, as it is in Aristocats for that sequence, maybe that's what the right person will embrace. Maybe that's what the right person will see you doing. Maybe all we have to do is not just, complain in our heads and say, well, why are my standards way too high? Why am I not finding anyone? Maybe that it's not that our standards are too high. Maybe our standards are right where we need to be. Maybe it's just about us finding the right person to share that part of our lives with.
Bonus content.
So I almost actually recorded as much as this camera allows me to record in a row. It's 30 minutes. 30 minutes is the max. So keep that in mind for the future. But with that in mind, we do have some updates on the setup here on the porch. We talked about it in the past. This is our, our toilet over here, and this is a sink. And in there we got some more toilet stuff and whatnot, and a bunch of bird seed. That's the update. That's where I sit. Bye now.